Bob Brooks, host of the Prudent Money Radio Show, heard daily on Bible School Radio 91.3 KDKR, Decatur, Dallas, Fort Worth, and on 91.3 KYJC Commerce.
Portions of KDKR's daily programming do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff.
Prudent Money with Bob Brooks is sponsored by the Prudent Money Foundation on 91.3.
Well, how about some steps you can take for a new year? Today we're going to take a look. Stay tuned for Prudent Money. This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. Thank you so much for joining me today. You know I do appreciate it. Well, we are into a new year, so how are those resolutions going? Today, Crown CEO and author Chuck Bentley is here today to give us some input. Chuck, always good to talk to you.
Well, it's my pleasure, Bob. It's good to be back with you.
You know, I would ask you, but I'd have to tell mine, and I don't want to do that. I was just going to ask you how your resolutions are going.
All right. Well, I'm doing great, and I hate to say like I'm bragging or anything, but I decided to go 1 year without eating sugar, and meaning desserts or sugar-fried drinks and things like that. I mean, you get sugar even in green beans today, but just adding sugar, refined sugar, not doing any of that. That's going really well. And then I also decided to not eat bread starting in January. And so far, I'm doing great, and I feel much better. I'm really excited about it.
Yeah, those are definitely two items you want to take out of your diet if you want to see some results. And I'll bet you that you are. It's a good habit to start a new year with.
Well, you wonder what that has to do with money, but I will say this. If you have a discipline, almost any area of your life, some small discipline, it helps to add discipline to other areas of your life. And essentially, if you can do one thing and stick with it, you can do anything and stick with it. So it encourages me even in the financial realm.
Absolutely. And you know, it's interesting when the psychology of New Year's resolutions, you get into February, you haven't kind of done like you haven't gone through the process like you really wanted to, and you start to give up. But this is still very early in the year to take another stab at it and create, as you were talking about, some new habits and disciplines.
Well, I think so. And even in my 1 year without sugar, I'm doing it with 9 other people. And we wrote down a little covenant with ourselves that we could have 4 exceptions. Like if you wanted to eat birthday cake on your birthday, or like I almost took an exception on the Super Bowl to eat something sweet, and, or Christmas or Thanksgiving. But I haven't done any of those yet.
That's good.
And the fact that I have the exceptions, that means I have grace. And I think with New Year's resolutions, especially around finances, if you get off track, show yourself some grace, forgive yourself, don't be ashamed, and just get right back at it. That's how you achieve goals through incremental progress.
I like the concept of daily disciplines because it really, to me, translates into habits. And the nice thing about habits, as far as New Year's resolutions go, that's something that you can add to a year and take and develop that and have that the rest of your life.
Well, totally. I just did a Devo for our staff on the word diligence. And the Bible talks about diligence over and over and over. The plans of the diligent lead to prosperity. And diligent means continuous action. Uninterrupted. You don't quit. And I think when we set a goal, particularly with our finances, they're long range, and a lot of times we get discouraged by a little setback here or there. But if we'll just remember, God said to the diligent, to those who just stay at it, that's when you make real progress in life on anything you want to accomplish.
And I think one of the problems that we run into is that when we set goals, New Year's resolutions, whatever we're trying to accomplish, there's not enough power behind it. And you had something that you written in the Christian Post. I think I got that right. That says, saying no to what I want today, gaining what I need for tomorrow. And
I think.
Go ahead.
I think that's what discipline is, Bob. Is is the ability to say no to what I'm desiring today. I like sugar. I'd like to have it every day of my life. But I also know that I need better health. So I have to say no to things that aren't good for me to gain what is good for me. And when it comes to our finances, 60% of Americans right now say they can't put their hands on $1,000 cash for an emergency expense. That's 60% of our population. And when I think of saying no, it's to spending what I don't have, which means I can avoid debt, and then I can save for the future. And saving creates margin. It creates confidence. It reduces your fear. It reduces your stress. There are so many benefits to saying no to what I want right now. I'm going to give you an example, Bob. I may have talked about this before, but my wife and I have been driving one car since last May, and we just tried it for a week and thought, we've never had just one car, never, in our whole married life. And I would say, I didn't think it was possible. Well, guess what? It is, and that is a huge savings to have just one car.
Yeah, it's amazing when you start to think about all the extra expenses that go along with the car and what you can save. We actually talked about this the other day about the economies of scaling down to one car, and it does make a lot of sense. I think one of the challenges to creating change is that we start out too big, trying to change a lot of things at once, when the key is to start small. If you're a good steward over the small things, you're proving you're ready for the bigger things in life. And it's got a lot of power of the Bible behind that.
Well, totally, Bob. And the idea is, I think you can summarize it like this: consistency compounds. Just like consistent saving, compound interest is one of the great financial miracles. But consistent on anything will compound. If you want better health, be consistent. If you want better relationships, be consistent. If you want better, financial health, then be consistent. And just do something on a regular basis, even small. And I think that's what is surprising to people, especially young people. Over a lifetime of being consistent, all the studies, a person starts saving at 21, they're far better off than the person who's going to start at age 31. And consistency is what compounds.
Talking about some of the things that improve the ability to reach your goals, I think we look at the process of change, maybe starting new habits, as something that we do alone. But you say, don't do it alone. Include God into the process, and it just changes the whole dynamic.
Well, I used to love what Larry Burkett would teach. He's the founder of Crown and not with us anymore, but he always said that being able to save money is a fruit of the Spirit. And, it's not listed directly, but he said that self-control is a fruit of the Spirit. That's what's promised in the Scripture. And that's such an interesting insight to our relationship with the Lord, because most people think discipline is self-control. Well, the Lord said, no, self is broken, self is fallen, self can't fix self. You need redemption. And when you turn to the Lord for help, you experience His Spirit controlling you and teaching you self-control. It almost sounds contradictory to say self doesn't control self, because God is saying, if you want self-control, turn to Him. And when you turn to Him, He can teach you to say no to unrighteousness, to say no to the things that are not good for you, and to say yes to the things that He said are best for us. And to me, that's what it means to live by His principles. I'm just doing what He said works. I'm doing what He said is good for me. And that's when you experience what I would call His supernatural intervention.
Yeah, I love that whole concept of supernatural help. And, it's interesting because when you do get to where you include God into the process, what you start to soon realize is that He can open doors that you never even imagined possible, that you didn't even know they were there, that you just can't do by yourself. And the power of having God with you is just something that you got to do.
Well, I've seen it over and over. I'll tell you a quick story, Bob. I had a young couple give testimony that graduated from a Crown class, and the wife came home one day and said to her husband, honey, I think I need to quit working and stay home and be with the children. I think we're under too much stress. I just really would like to be home. And I think God told me to stay home. And he said, are you kidding me? Well, God didn't tell me you should stay home. And what are we going to do about that $30,000 in credit card debt we have? And she said, I don't know, but I just really believe God wants me to stay home, and I'm going to resign in 2 weeks. Well, he was really sore about that. And the day she resigned, he got a call from a headhunter and said, hey, there's another company in town that really loves your work. They're interested in you coming to work for them, and they're offering you a $30,000 signing bonus. To me, that's just supernatural help. That's just God. How could anybody have ever foreseen that? And his wife looked at him and said, see, I told you it was God.
Yeah, the other moral of that story is we need to be listening to our wives a little bit more.
Yeah, and he would say, well, and include him in on what God is telling you to do, right? So right. He's not caught off guard either.
So we can go through the route of goal setting, yet statistics show that the goal setting doesn't have a very good track record. Talk a little bit about your method that you wrote about, the how and the why.
Well, I think that if you know sort of why you're trying to do anything in life, the why is going to drive you. The why is going to give you a much greater motivation. To me, the Bible says the Lord knows the motivation of our heart. And when we really get clear about that and we write down our why, I think that we're much more likely to achieve it. And if we just develop a simple methodology, a lot of times it's way, way too complicated, what we dream up that we need to do to fix some problem. And so to me, if you will just start small, you have your how and your why clear, and then you set up some sort of celebration. What is my goal? Why is this goal important? How am I going to act on that goal every day? And how do I celebrate it once I achieve that goal? That's when it gets really exciting.
This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money radio show. I'm talking to Chuck Bentley. Chuck is an author of some great books, one being Economic Evidence for God, Uncovering the Invisible Hand That Guides the Economy, and then also 7 Gray Swans, Trends That Threaten Our Financial Future. 7 Gray Swans was written 3 years ago, right, Chuck?
Yeah, 2 years ago.
And very, very relevant to today. Hopefully we're going to get to talk a little bit about a digital currency a little bit later on in the program. But if you want more information about Chuck, more information about a wonderful ministry, which is the Crown's ministry, go to crown.org and check out the information there. So let's talk some about, financial goals that you should consider. And when I look at some of these people, I think sometimes people that are listening go, yeah, I've heard, get out of debt. Yeah, sure. That's something you want to do. Give or save. Yeah. But these are things that if you did start to focus on them and develop the disciplines that you needed, these can make a huge difference in your life. Let's start with give and save. I mean, how do you start this process if you have never really been disciplined about it?
Well, I think the Bible almost pleads with us to take it seriously. And when the Lord said, it is more blessed to give than to receive, he's basically saying it's to your advantage to think of yourself as a giver, not as a receiver. A friend of mine recommended a book years ago called The Go-Giver. And it inverts the idea to go into the marketplace to be the go-getter and to be rather the go-giver, that we give of ourselves first. And I would just say to anybody listening that is thinking what would be the best financial goal to really take on, and that would be to give first, save second. That's just a simple little way that I frame it out, that I think that's what God says is best for us. Be a giver first, not just tipping God, but making it a priority, making it the number one goal for your purpose with money is to give it away. That renounces its control over your life. It also brings you joy that nothing else can bring to your life, such as just being a blessing to other people. And I think it helps you to get your financial priorities straight. I know when we do our tax return every year, and it asks, have you given away enough to itemize your deductions? Ann and I are always excited about that, and we're thinking, woohoo! Not only do we honor the Lord first, but now the government's giving us some money, some benefit for that. But if you give first and save second, that means before you've ever spent a dime, you've gotten your priorities straight. And that simple little construct will solve almost all of your financial problems.
Let's talk a little bit about reducing debt. Of course, there's really two good methodologies for doing that. Talk a little bit about the difference between the snowball method and the avalanche method.
Yeah, it really depends on what sort of your own makeup. I say there's three methods. The snowball is where you pay off the smallest debt first, so that then you apply that payment to the next smallest debt, and you get a lot of momentum. It's really the way to encourage yourself so that you're not stuck and feeling defeated, and you gain momentum. So you list all your debts top to bottom and say, all right, my smallest debts is $1,000 on my credit card or a store account, and I'm just going to knock it out, and I'm going to work all the way up to that student loan debt and then finally to the mortgage debt. And I like that method. The avalanche is considered to some a better way financially, and that's to pay off your highest interest debt first. So if you're paying any kind of balance on a credit card, you're probably in the 18% range on your interest. And so by getting rid of that, you're going to gain huge momentum to free up capital that had been going into interest. By the way, Bob, the number one expense in an American budget today is interest.
I don't doubt it.
That's the number one expense. And so getting rid of anything that you're paying interest on is essentially getting debt free. And then the third method we call the snowflake method, and the snowflake is if you just reduce a little principal every now and then when you get around to it. And so that's not a very good method.
And then let's talk a little bit about setting retirement goals. I mean, this is a real problem when it comes to an overall with financial planning, is that people just are not doing it. And setting some simple retirement goals is not that hard to do.
Well, Bob, you're exactly right. I read a survey or study not long ago of the number one financial regret of a senior citizen. And their number one regret is they didn't plan for retirement sooner in their life. And what happens is you end up with a complete lifestyle clash. If you've been employed, you've been living off of your present income, you get to the retirement age, and either you can't stop working, or if you do, your lifestyle has to be dramatically changed, even ruling out some of your preferred things, how you had envisioned spending your life. So starting early, it goes back to that consistency. Setting aside funds now, saying no to maybe a country club membership, maybe that new car you want, maybe that vacation you had planned. Saying no to set aside money on a regular basis that you can use for the future. And I think it is far better than what most people have as a retirement plan, which is depending on the government to provide Social Security. And that's not a very good plan at all.
One of the things that you say in that article was that, and I love this show yourself some grace. Just so very, very important. I think if there's one thing that spiritually that I've really been focusing on for this year is to show grace in all situations, and really focus on that. Talk about showing yourself some grace.
Well, I think we all are fallible. We're born into a world that's fallen. We make mistakes, and sometimes we're the hardest critic on ourselves. I know that it feels awful to live in shame and regret, and to constantly look back on your failure. Or even if right now you're thinking, oh, those people are talking about being a good planner or being disciplined, and I'm not any of that. I'm bad with money. I'm way behind. I'll never catch up. All of that is talk coming from the enemy. All of that is what Satan would like to convince you of, that keeps you paralyzed and stuck. And just to say, God forgives me for any mistakes that I've made. He loves me. He wants to redeem those problems for my good. this is going to be a new day. The Scripture says, today, if you hear the voice of the Lord, do not harden your heart. Don't let the enemy steal that seed. Don't let it be a fleeting moment in your life. I've seen people make changes that seem way too late or impossible, and God is, because of His grace, He makes up the difference that no man could have ever thought possible. I could tell stories the whole program about how God has shown grace to His people, and they have overcome the financial mistakes of the past.
This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money radio show, talking to author and CEO of Crown Ministries, Chuck Bentley. And you need to go check out Chuck's books. Economic Evidence for God, Uncovering the Invisible Hand That Guides the Economy is his latest book. And then also 7 Gray Swans, Trends That Threaten Our Financial Future. As I was saying earlier today, it's been 2 or 3 years since he's written this book, which is hard to believe. And everything in there is just right on, as if he wrote it today. So go check that out. Let's talk a little bit to transition to this. We don't have that much time left. But we'll get started and then have a visit about this next month. But one of the things you talk about is digital currency. What are you seeing lately as far as digital currency goes, and the develop of that into maybe it's part of our culture?
Yeah, it's really an interesting question, Bob. I wrote an article about the fact that it had taken a huge whack to its credibility. And anytime an asset is considered unstable or potentially, I guess, just at a greater risk, the risk is increasing, then money leaves it. It flows away from it. And I think we've seen that. We saw a huge drop in the value of crypto assets. And I think I don't think that credibility has returned. You probably study it more closely than I do, but there's a huge amount of pressure for it to be regulated. The whole space is ultimately, I think, going to have to be regulated, which starts to defeat some of its attraction. Most of the people who were originally interested in it were trying to escape the control of the government that had on their currency. If you live in a communist country, you love the idea of a digital currency out from under the control of your nation. If you live in a country that's headed towards hyperinflation, you love the idea of a currency that's out from under a central bank. But what we're seeing is that those systems don't self-regulate well, and so the risk of owning those assets are not nearly as comfortable as people originally thought. They are not surrogate gold because of the vulnerabilities for fraud, for failure, for all the reasons that the governments are saying they need regulated. So that's still my perspective. Have you changed your perspective on it, Bob?
No, not at all. In fact, we can talk more about this next month. But it comes down to what's happening to crypto. If you go back and you compare it to what happened in stocks in 1929, because stocks were primarily not very regulated from an investment standpoint in 1929 until the SEC came on board about 1932. So it's interesting if you compare the two as to the crash that crypto has experienced versus the crash that stocks have experienced. But I think that, I think crypto is getting to a point where people are going, I don't know that I want any part of that. But looking forward to talking about that next month. Well, Chuck, always great to have you. It's a blessing when you come on the program, and I really appreciate it.
God bless you, Bob. Thank you.
This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money radio show. If you got a question for me, please go to the website at prudentmoney.com and send it in, because we are all out of time. Till we do meet again next time. Keep the faith and have a great rest of the day.
That's all the time we have for today. Questions or comments for Bob, or to find out more great information like what you've just heard, visit www.prudentmoney.com. Be sure to join Bob Brooks again for the next edition of Prudent Money.